Hello Horror Hounds, welcome back to my A to Z of horror, and we are already at You, and we travel back to that distant land, 1997, with a New Zealand horror film, a first time feature written and directed by Scott Reynolds. Things are going to get, well, You is for the ugly. As is traditional now, I will point you towards Jambo Shango and Randy Mole's own entry for You in their A to Z of horror, which inspired this one. They're talking about urban legends, Bloody Mary, but let's us take a look at the ugly. The 90s is a strange decade for horror. It was a time that wasn't so concerned about sequels, franchises, or cinematic universes. And the received wisdom is that 90s horror is generally depicted as a wasteland until Scream comes along, probably because it's filled with so many of these weird little one-off outliers that didn't spawn sequels or had a marketable IP. Not that Scream isn't awesome, it absolutely is, but when we think the 90s, we mainly think Scream and other knockoffs that racked up sequels and became a known commodity. The I Know What You Did, the urban legends. Again, check out Jambo and Randy's review of Bloody Mary. But before Ghostface asked Drew Barrymore if she liked scary movies, there are loads of little diamonds in the rough. The cover of The Ugly says it's on a par with Silence of the Lambs and Seven. It's not. But it is taking from that serial killer milieu. The film is about a psychiatrist who is meeting with a serial killer to determine whether or not he's been successfully cured and can stand trial. As simple as that. Clearly riffing on the best or most memorable bits from Silence of the Lambs, which is Clarice talking to Hannibal. During the long interview scenes, the drama slowly unfolds, mainly in flashback, where Karen, the psychiatrist, is trying to understand why Simon did the things that he did, but it's much more of a fusion of past and present, and you start to get the feeling that perhaps anything could happen. Scott Reynolds makes a couple of bold stylistic choices that you're going to have to make peace with towards the start of the movie, because he doubles down and then trebles down on them. The first is that the blood as depicted in this movie is black. Is this how Simon actually sees the blood when he's killing his victims? Does he see them as less than human? Is it just a canny way to sidestep the censors, who typically frown on gushes of claret? Or is it maybe even a sly wink to Psycho and the printer's ink that they used as a stand-in for the blood to drain down the plug hole in the shower scene? Lots of questions, and the answers are up to you to come up with, and this is something you can say about the film as a whole. It asks a lot of questions. It gives you a lot of pieces to put together in any way you see fit, provides you with no real answers, but looks striking whilst doing it. Probably more arresting than the black blood is the vivid colour palette. It's probably expressed quite well on the back of the actual case here. Hyper-real, certainly not realistic. A predominance of blue, cut through with key moments of red. There's a wonderful image in slap bang in the middle of the film of Simon's mother waiting for the young boy to return home, silhouetted in a doorway, backlit in red. That will remain with you. Of course, me being me, any director who uses colour so boldly will put me in mind of Dario Argento. Now, Reynolds is not aping Argento, but come on, during the first murder scene, with a straight razor no less, there's a prominently placed ornamental crystal swan on a coffee table in the foreground of the shot. I refuse to believe that that's not an oblique reference to the bird with the crystal plumage, and perhaps all that comes with such an illusion, what you think you're seeing is not what is actually happening. I think the key to the blue and red colour scheme comes very early on in the film, where Karen, arriving at the institution, meets a patient who wears the old cardboard 3D glasses. And you remember those plastic lenses, one blue, one red, and again it's when she puts them on to see the world and takes them off that she attacks Karen. And again, it's perhaps suggesting that you're seeing the world through some coloured lenses. You're maybe not supposed to trust everything that Simon is telling you. Reynolds' other key choice is in how he uses the frequent flashbacks told by Simon about his childhood, about the various murders, about his capture. Past and present overlap one another. We'll suddenly cut back to Simon in the past, but Karen will be there in the scene, still asking him questions as he is interacting with characters from the past. The past infects the present and vice versa. Twice, items from a flashback appear in the cell during the interview, and Simon's drawings as a child in the flashback inform scenes that we are yet to see in the present day. The ugly of the title is sometimes how Simon sees himself when he sees his reflection in the mirror. He's horribly scarred. Is this how he sees himself, how he is inside? Because outside he's very angelic. And even this gets fudged and futzed when he introduces the notion during the interviews of the visitors, which are a sort of hive-like collection of Simon's victims, spirits that surround him and demand that he kills again to swell their numbers, making his torture from them constantly escalating. They look particularly striking, again with black ink-like blood constantly dripping from their mouths, dressed all in white, their hair all straggly. Interestingly, sort of predating the J horror wave of lank-haired, pale vengeance spirits, vengeance demons or ghosts that would become really popular for a brief period in America, much more so in Asia, and still popular under my roof. He names the chorus of ghosts around him, the visitors, from spying Karen's visitor's ID badge on the desk, but then they sort of somehow turn out to be real, or perhaps it's a shared psychosis. The movie manages to pull off quite a trick with Simon. At its core, he's a heartless killer, but the film manipulates you into feeling lots of sympathy for him. Paolo Rotondo's performance of him has a lot to do with that. He's a very sweet-faced, very pretty-looking man. I said angelic earlier, and I think that's by design. You're either going to buy that and feel sympathy for him, or you're just not going to feel that he's killer material. It's like, you know, it's like one of those puzzles that you used to have where you could slide the squares across and eventually you could make a picture out of it. There are so many tiles in this movie, and it's up to you to slide them into whatever picture you want to make this movie about. Some people will find that intensely frustrating. I kind of dig it. I could have done with maybe a little bit more of just something definitive, some sort of rock to cling to, that yes, this is definitely real. Even the introduction, seemingly cast iron introduction of a supernatural element towards the end with the visitors, that Karen sees herself. Are they real though, or is it what's referred to as a folie à deux, a shared mania, a shared delusion? Has he infected her mind through her close proximity to him, as it is suggested he's done with the head of the institution and perhaps all of the other inmates? Does he have such a forceful cult of personality that he is able to impose his own delusions on others? And I suspect, having rewatched this again, that even though he's locked up in his cell and even though he's beaten by the orderlies, I think he is actually in control of everyone, manipulating everyone. I think he brings the beatings on himself because he feels a level of guilt for the crimes that he's done. But I actually think he's in charge of everything. The Ugly is a combination of two genres that should never really be combined and should never really work together. It's a psychological serial killer movie, like Silence of the Lambs, but it's also a vaguely supernatural ghost story. Usually these two are kept very far apart. I can't think of another sort of supernatural police procedural psychological serial killer movie. Please let me know in the comments if there's anything else that fits in that sort of Venn diagram overlap. The Frighteners, maybe, but that's sort of leavened with an awful lot of humour, whereas this is played absolutely straight as a serial killer movie and as a supernatural sort of ghost story horror movie. This is definitely not a horror comedy. It definitely is a first-time feature. You can see on the back of the case some of the instincts that first-time directors go to ram their movies full of sort of like music video glitches and things like that. It happens when the visitors appear, but Reynolds is very restrained in that regard. He doesn't swamp his film with it, but certainly when the visitors appear, we're entering MTV land, which is a disease that infects an awful lot of 90s horror movies, let's be honest. And it also infects an awful lot of first-time feature directors' stuff as well, especially if they've come from music videos. They can't completely leave the music video aesthetic behind. It's a really enjoyable film. It's really intriguing. If you haven't seen it, definitely give it a spin. When we move to V, we're going to be looking at another standalone 90s oddity. Very strange movie. A very Marmite movie. But I don't know why I'm sticking with 90s oddities one after the other. Something might be catching. Something certainly catching in the next installment, because V is for